south of the border, down Mexico way. That's where I fell in love when the stars above came out to play. And now as I wander...
Hello there, all you expat wannabes. I'm Johnny Mueller, and you're listening to the Expat Files, Living in Latin America, the show that tells you just what it's like to live, work, play, and or retire down here in Latin America. It's a mix of the good, the bad, the ugly, and the great, and it's all right here, so let's get started. Finally, Latin American governments are starting to think with more than a half a brain. What I mean is, you've heard me say in the last couple of weeks and months that Latin American countries will start loosening up and dropping restrictions with this Cov-Idiot mess when they finally realize it's not the pandemic they thought it was. It's more like a regular flu season on steroids. That's steroids light, not heavy ones. Now, you know, Mexico, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, and a few other Latin American countries, they've already eliminated that stupid PCR test on entry into the country. And now you've got Ecuador following suit in a big way. Listen to this, an article that came out just yesterday. It pretty much says it all and points to the path that most other Latin American countries are soon to follow. Listen to this. By the way, if you hear some blasting, pounding, and hammering going on in the background, well, that's because there's some heavy-duty construction going on nearby, and I just can't do anything about it. So anyway, the article's title is, get this, High Court in Ecuador rules a state of emergency is unconstitutional. It says pandemic conditions do not warrant any restrictions at all. Man, have we been waiting for that kind of news for a long, long time. The article starts by saying, and I'll translate here, it says, Ecuador's constitutional court ruled Saturday night that the government's current state of emergency is unconstitutional. The emergency declared by President Lenin Moreno, based on fears that holiday events and new, more contagious COVID-19 variants would lead to an increase in cases and possibly overload the country's healthcare system, is unfounded and unconstitutional. And then it goes on to say, among other things, the state of emergency in Ecuador imposed a nationwide nighttime curfew plus restrictions on the operation of private vehicles and the sale of liquor. And it restricted all gatherings to less than 10 people. But the Supreme Court ruled Saturday that the state of emergency was a violation of civil liberties that did not conform to constitutional standards. Do you think the U.S. Supreme Court has the balls to actually follow the letter of the U.S. Constitution? Or you think they'll keep sucking up to big business, big pharma, and Dr. Fauci? Or will they do the right thing? Hell no, they're just a bunch of spineless, manipulated weenies. But I digress. But anyway, the article states that a number of legal and health experts in Ecuador had predicted the court's decision when President Moreno declared the emergency, claiming the pandemic conditions are improving in Ecuador and that the order was based on unsubstantiated projections. In other words, bad or fake science. Stating factually and pointing out that the number of COVID-19 cases in Ecuador and hospitalizations and death has been steadily declining since July. No matter what the talking heads are saying on the news, those are the facts. Meanwhile, it says business organizations applauded the court's decision, but expressed regret that it did not come much sooner. It's the correct response, says Jaime Iglesias, spokesman for the Quito Association of Restaurant and Hotel Owners. But we needed a decision like that weeks, if not months ago. Our businesses were shut down for the best time of the year, Christmas and New Year's. For at least a third of our businesses, it was the final nail in the coffin. And now we hear formally that suddenly the government says its action was illegal. But the news is way too late for many. Then it says, according to Ecuador attorney Andre Benvides, he says that Moreno's reason for the emergency was questionable from the very beginning. The court made it clear in August, way back when, that it recognized the need to return to a level of normalcy to provide employment and business opportunities to the population. Not to mention, there are many medical professionals also questioning the basis for the emergency order, and they're at the front lines. Then it says, according to Paul Cardenas, professor of microbiology and researcher at the San Francisco University in Quito, he says the government always says follow the science, but clearly they did not and do not. He says the pandemic conditions in Ecuador have been improving day to day, and the numbers and the science prove it. Yet the government continues to maintain old restrictions and introduce new ones that just cannot be justified. So, in its decision, the Supreme Court said, quote, it's not indifferent to the consequences of response capacity of the healthcare system, and even if the trend of hospitalizations increases, which it hasn't. It's just the opposite. The government does not provide the proper justification to deny citizens of their constitutional rights and civil liberties. The Supreme Court statement also said that the government is justified in all efforts to implement and enforce rules that protect the public health as long as they do not infringe on constitutional rights. So as a result, and the court's decision being final and unappealable, the National Police said that the 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. curfew and driving restrictions and other controls on personal movement and the hours of business openings and all the previous lockdown restrictions are now suspended as of Sunday, January 3rd, with the police command issuing in print a statement to that effect. You got to applaud Ecuador's Supreme Court for that. Better late than never. But, it goes beyond that. It proves another thing, that most of the rest of the world's governments are just a bunch of spineless dickheads. Because, if you dig a little deeper, it does seem to boil down to the fact it's all about power, control, and money. But you knew that already, right? Anyway, that's really good news for travelers, and hopefully the real science and logic contagion will continue to infect and spread throughout the bumbling, corrupt Congresses and Supreme Court dickheads everywhere. But then again, let's not be too optimistic. I mean, look, since when did any government anywhere do anything to help anyone besides themselves, their friends, their cronies, and their political donors? Case in point, every single member of Congress is a multimillionaire, including Bernie Sanders. Yet they spend weeks and weeks debating a stimulus bill that'll give $600 to the average American, when in reality it's really all about porking up that bill and giving massive freebies to their friends. Have you read some of the fine print in that bill? It's pathetic. But then again, you voted for those kids. So it really is true. You get the government you deserve. Oh, by the way, did you know Joe, as vice president, made $396,000 in 2016? But just 4 years after leaving the Obama White House, he somehow made more than $15 million. In fact, Joe scored more than $10 million for a book no one read. And his wife, Jill, made $3 million for her book that no one read. Then, of course, there's Hunter, who scored mega millions from the Chinese. And if you're one of those guys like me who doesn't vote, because they're all corrupt, pustulant, maggotus dickheads, then your only alternative is to go down with the ship or get the hell out of Dodge. So my question to you is, how's that plan B coming? Meanwhile, in Latin American news that'll piss you off, here's reason 4,826 why I'd never recommend working, playing, and or doing business in Costa Rica, or as Canadians like to call it, Costa Rica. Turns out, you see, as of January 1st, 2021, just a couple of days ago, owners of homes, villas, condos, etc. in Costa Rica, whose construction value exceeds the equivalent of $217,000, that means practically all gringos and expats living in gated, guarded communities, will now have to pay a brand new tax known as the luxury home tax. Wow, talk about killing the goose that laid the golden egg. According to the new law, which was published in the Costa Rican newspaper La Gaceta, in English, the Gazette. So anyway, they passed a luxury tax specifically aimed at gringos and expats. Because you see, the locals who do own houses don't own houses worth over $100,000. In fact, I recently read that the average middle-class Costa Rican lives in a house, apartment, or residence that's worth between $60,000 and $70,000. So obviously that law is directly aimed at gringos and expats. But to add insult to injury, Francisco Villalobos, managing partner of ISC Abogados, that's a lawyer group, told in an interview in Costa Rica's largest newspaper, La Nación, The Nation, that unfortunately homeowners will find this tax very complicated, very difficult to calculate, because first you must estimate the value of your property and then add the square meters of the common areas, etc. That means if you live in a condominium complex, you'll pay even more. You'll be paying tax on the common areas too. So in effect, we're talking about double taxation. In fact, triple, quadruple, and depending how many people live in your condominium or residential tower complex, every owner will have to add the common area, square meters, to the evaluation of their property to determine whether you have to pay the luxury tax. So then what does that mean? Well, suppose you live in a residential tower and your property has a value of $195,000. Then you wouldn't qualify for that luxury tax, right? Well, not so fast. Because the common areas like the parking lot and the roof terrace, the lobbies, the balconies, the elevators, Well, all that Aryan footage has a value too, which will be calculated and added to the value of your property. So if you think because your property is worth $195K, you're scot-free, think again. You'll probably end up paying that luxury tax. And you pay it yearly, by the way. Oh, wait a minute. Did I say scot-free? That's racist, isn't it? As is the phrase welshing on a bet. That'd be racist against the Welsh, right? Oh, and you can't say, here comes the paddy wagon. Then again, if you say it's the luck of the Irish, I guess that's racist too, but in a good way. Who'd have thunk there could be good and bad racism? According to the race police in the U.S., that is. I'm confused. Wouldn't be the first time, but I'll tell you, certainly extremely happy I don't live up by you. And you know, for me, finding Latin America, that wasn't the luck of the Irish, because, well, my parents were German, which in Spanish is alemán, who down here are noted in the hospitality business as being tightwads, skinflints, and all-around bad tippers. And in Spanish, all those pejoratives are combined into one word, tacaño, tacaño. T-A-C-A-N-O, and the N is a ñe. You know, the N with the little squiggle on top? And there's a physical gesture or movement Latinos make to indicate a tacaño or tightwad without saying a word. So if you ever see a Latino or Latina, hold out their arm and touch their elbow with the other hand. It means the same thing, skinflint, tightwad, or cheapskate. So when you're down here, meandering through the coffee fields and shopping malls, whatever, if you see someone touch their elbow, you're witnessing one Latino calling another one a tightwad. By the way, speaking of Ecuador, here's a bit of definitive news that really hammers home just how corrupt these slimebag politicians are. Of course, you know, every single one of your governors, senators, congressmen, president, cabinet, they're all a bunch of sociopathic, power-loving scumbags. They end up being millionaires, sometimes billionaires, sucking off the public trough too. But you knew that already. And of course, you know, Latin American politicians, and politicians in general, are all spawned from the same toilet bowl. They're in a putrid, pathetic class of their own. And if you have any doubts at all about that, and believe me, I've heard people at parties up in the States and here in Latin America defend their guy, their mayor, their governor, whatever, trying to tell me that he's different. He's trying to do a good job. Bullshit. But that's human nature. If your friends or one of your family is a politician, he's always the exception to the rule, right? Because you're connected. Hey, I was guilty of that myself. When I was building a house right outside Chicago, I needed to get a zoning waiver. And my sister's godfather happened to be a U.S. senator. Who do you think I called to make that zoning thing go away? Even though, way back when, more than 30-something years ago, I hated and despised politicians just as much as I do now. But it's human nature, when you've got one in the family, to ask for a favor once in a while. So, guilty as charged, I'm a hypocrite too. So, shoot me. What would you have done? Oh, and he was the guy that got me the summer job on the Chicago Street Department too. Wasn't a good job. I was the dead dog crew, but just one phone call from my dad to him and I was in. And in a way, though this is hypocritical, you'd be nuts not to take advantage of your connections. And that's exactly what's wrong with politics. And that same thing is playing out tens of thousands of times every day all around the world. Not to mention big banks, big pharma, and big military have all those lobbyists. And then you've got all those corporations that are big-time contributors and are just buying favors. It's a disgusting, corrupt system, but you can pretty much opt out by having a plan B. However, everyone knows politicians lie, skim, and, well, they become billionaires at the trough, or when they get out, they get appointed as million-dollar dummy figureheads on corporate boards. But even the scheming and the thieving has its limits. In fact, I've heard more than one politician off the record say, stealing or skimming 20% is about the limit. When they steal much more than that, sometimes the sweaty masses get pissed and take to the streets. Like, for example, the recent case with ex-president from Ecuador, Rafael Correa, who's on the lam right now in Belgium. He can be there for the rest of his life because he's married to a woman who's got a Belgian passport. So he's protected. Protected from what, you might ask? Well, the courts in Ecuador have thrown the book at him. And because they know he'll never come back to face the music, and he's living like a prince or the Sheik of Araby in Belgium right now, get this. The Tribunal of the National Court of Justice in Ecuador ordered the seizure of his real estate. Now remember, this guy came from humble beginnings. He was a man of the people, like Vomit. Oh, and if you've been paying attention, no doubt you'll know that Vomit has 3 or 4 properties worth 10 or 15 million apiece. How'd that happen? Anyway, former President Rafael Correa just had his properties in Ecuador seized. You know, he's got properties everywhere, but they were only able to seize the ones they had jurisdiction over. in Ecuador. Here's the list. The tribunal found 87 properties listed in his name and 44 vehicles. He's facing, get this, 38 different charges of corruption. Worse yet, they caught his cronies burning the majority of the evidence against the former president, while there were massive protests in the streets against the government of Moreno. Turns out they figured it was a good time to destroy the evidence during that chaos. That was in October 2019. Well, anyway, I just wanted to demonstrate once again what skunks, blood clots, and pussballs these politicians are. But you knew that already, so I'm preaching to the choir. Sorry about that. And now let's hit some emails. Dear Johnny, this is from Stan. He says, Johnny, you've been talking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies here and there for a long time now. I'm one of those guys you talk about that heard it all but never pulled the trigger, and I'm very pissed off at myself about that. My question is, Johnny, now that Bitcoin's hit 30,000 and above, do you think it's too late to get in? Is it over? And if it is, do you have any other recommendations besides Bitcoin? There's tons of other coins out there. Signed, kicking myself every time I see the crypto news, Stanley. All right, Stan. And again, as a disclaimer, I am not a financial analyst. But being an engineer in a past life, I know some extremely brilliant nerds and geeks who are much smarter than I am. In fact, sometimes in their presence, they make you feel kind of small. Not intentionally, though. They're usually not at all out to impress. I mean, guys whose brains are really operating at a different level. They're not materialistic. They're not into the I'm better than you game. They're not out to impress anyone. In fact, that's what I really like about the early adopters, the geek and nerd crowd. They're only in it for, well, the pleasure of being in it. Being the first, being the innovators. Now, of course, a lot of the early adopters went out and bought Lamborghinis and stuff, but you know why that happened? Because way back when, in the first run-up of cryptocurrency back in 2017, when it hit 20,000 Bitcoin, I'm talking about, the Lamborghini people were extremely smart and on the cutting edge. They were the very first car company to accept Bitcoin as payment for their cars. No other car company did. That's why you always hear about people saying, I'm going to get my Lambo. It's because you didn't have to go to an exchange like Coinbase, trade your Bitcoin for cash, pay fees, lose a lot of money in slippage, report it to the IRS and all that. All you had to do was send your Bitcoin directly to Lamborghini. So it wasn't for them about having the coolest car on the block. It was just a way to spend your crypto. I mean, really, if you're living in your mother's basement and you suddenly have millions in crypto, what do you spend it on? And nope, I don't have millions, and nope, I don't have a Lambo. You know, I never was much of a show-off. Though I did go through a phase in my early 20s when I got money way too fast, so I got myself heavily into debt, like all my other pretentious idiot friends. But I grew out of it, and by the time I was 30, I'd liquidated everything. And that's, of course, when I left the States for good. Best thing I ever did. So yes, I went through my classic car, Mercedes, and Rolex phase in my 20s. Thank God I grew out of that. I have absolutely zero jewelry, zero watches, zero necklaces, no tongue studs or gold teeth, no hot or expensive car or clothes at all. My idea of fine living is perfect weather, great views, and a great house, but far off the beaten path enough so that no one can see my spread from the street. Now, I may be a blowhard, but I'm just not a materialistic show-off in that kind of way. Like I said, I went through that phase in my 20s. And believe me, when I cashed out, I had so many mortgages, I just about broke even. I had the typical American sickness, lots of stuff and lots of payments. But as my mother once said, the only people who have low stress and really sleep well are people who don't have payments due at the end of the month. And my Uncle Bernie once told me, the luckiest guy in the world is the guy who can wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, look outside and say, hell, I don't want to go to work. I'm just going to lay in bed all day. And the only guy that can do that without any stress or secondary effects is a guy who's got no bills to pay at the end of the month, because he can roll over and sleep it off. The guy who's got bills to pay has to drag himself out of bed and go into work, because if he doesn't, he won't be able to crack his nut at the end of the month. You get it? Oh, and my Uncle Bernie, my godfather, also said, the only thing worth going into debt for is the house you live in. And he said, as for cars, never go into debt for a car. Buy what you can afford with cash, and then later on in your life, you'll have enough cash to buy a really nice car someday. All right, so much for the homespun wisdom, huh? Hey, we're not living in that world anymore, are we? Well, some of us are. A lot of you listening to the show are. Anyway, Stan, about that question, is it too late to invest in Bitcoin? Well, guess what, Stan? When Bitcoin went from $200 to $800 People sent me emails saying, Johnny, is it too late to get into Bitcoin? And then Bitcoin went to 1,200, and I got emails saying, is it too late to get into Bitcoin? Then I got emails when it hit 5,000 and 8,000 and 12,000 saying the same thing. Johnny, is it over? It's too late to invest in Bitcoin. I get that same question every time Bitcoin makes a new high. So I guess you get the point. My projection, by the way, for 2021 is that Bitcoin will hit 50,000. And as I do this show, it's 32.5 right now. And Stan, about that question, is there something better to get into, another coin besides Bitcoin? Well, you know about Ethereum, right? It's the second biggest crypto behind Bitcoin. All of the hundreds of so-called shit coins out there, the ones that actually matter, that might have a use case, they're all based on Ethereum. In other words, to get in on those coins and projects, you have to buy or stake Ethereum first. That means most all other coins besides Bitcoin are hooked to Ethereum. So in the end, Ethereum has nowhere to go but up, since you have to have Ethereum to jump on board those other platforms. In my projection, what I'm hearing from the smart nerds, that is, Ethereum, which is at about $1,000 as I record this, could very well be $5,000 by the end of 2021. Again, that's not financial advice. I'm just telling you lots of people who are a lot smarter than I am are saying. And believe me, these guys live and breathe crypto. These guys aren't weekend warriors. In fact, if you look at the computer that they've always got turned on 24/7, it's nothing but charts, graphs, and crypto stuff. It's their life, and I get my info direct from the horse's mouth. So, Stan, maybe my answer wasn't straightforward, but you can almost never go wrong when you listen to people who are a lot smarter than you are. Thing is, guys that are way ahead of the crowd like that, at first, people laugh at them. They think they're cracked, which is why perhaps 95% of people who get into any investments at all get wrecked. It's the 5% who everyone said was cracked at the beginning that make all the dough in the end. They're just ahead of their time. Even really smart guys get it wrong sometimes. Remember what Bill Gates said? He said, the internet was a fad. It's really not going to go anywhere. Yeah, right, Bill. I suggest you double mask up and vaccinate yourself a couple times. How about it? After all, you were so clairvoyant about the internet, right? All right, now an email from Bill. He says, Johnny, just listened to your first 2021 show. Actually, I'm glad to hear you postponed your seminar to March or April. I'll be much more likely to attend then. Still waiting for a show with more robust descriptions of the Latin American dating scene for gringos and expats. Let's face it, for us older guys, it's a big draw for heading south of the border. Love and romance, Hope you have a whole show on it soon. Take care, Johnny. Signed, Bill. Okay, here we go. I get all kinds of emails from people asking me about the mating, dating, love, and romance thing. Yep, and I get those emails from gringos and gringas. It's not just lopsided on the gringo, hook me up with a nice Latina scale. I don't want to turn this into a Lonely Hearts Club show, but I could. Now, wouldn't that be a great podcast? A Gringo's Guide to Latin American Mating, Dating, Love, and Romance. Man, would that be popular? Well, Bill, don't worry. I'll be doing a show on that very soon. But just to show you what kind of emails I get all the time, here's one from listener Kurt. He says, Yo, Johnny. Haha, you were right. One of the first cute Latina girls I matched with online asked for dough almost immediately. First, it was for her haircut. Then it was for her mom 2 days later. When I said no, I'm available to date, not to be her bank, then she asked for a loan. I said no, and she said, well, I guess we've got nothing to talk about then, and she blocked me. Boo-hoo, I had to laugh when I thought of the episode you did when you said that just might happen. Bottom line, gold digger avoided. I'm in Guatemala right now, Lake Atitlan tomorrow. By the way, your seminar logistics lady, Rita, is fantastic. Signed, Kurt. All right, Bill and Kurt, and all you other thousands of people who send me emails about mating, dating, and hooking up. The thing is, there's only about 2 ways to have first contact for mating and dating. Number 1, the best way is to meet a person face-to-face, moseying through a mall, walking down a busy street, standing in line at a bank. Those are always the best ways to meet a prospective person of the opposite sex. That is, if you're looking for the opposite sex, but it works the other way, too. The thing is, though, and I've heard this story from many gringos and expats, they're gun-shy of walking up to a girl because in the States, you almost always face rejection, and it can be severe. Especially these days in the first world where white males are considered to be the cause of everything that's bad in the world. Now, if a guy goes up to a girl he doesn't know in the States, you just might get that cold, don't bug me stare. You may even be viewed as a stalker and get a face full of pepper spray. Though chances are, you'll just get ignored. Whereas in Latin America, I guarantee you no Latino's going to ever treat you like that. Somehow they've all been brought up to be kind and nice, especially if you're a gringo. Remember, you've got that gringo advantage thing going for you. That means if you're a 5 on the 10 scale, you're an automatic 7. The gringo advantage is worth 2 points. Unless, of course, you're in a place like Costa Rica on the Gringo Tourist Trail, then you're just a $sign. Now, if your plan B is to come down to Latin America, but you're still up in the States and you're looking to play the mating dating game, you'll probably end up searching for a mate on one of those dating apps. And believe me, that's a real minefield, because I'd say at least 3/4 of the ladies on those hookup sites are really just looking for a payday, and they might have 10 or even 20 gringos they're playing that same game with. And if they're able to extract 50 or $100 from each of these guys, it's pretty lucrative. For some of those girls, squeezing money out of gringos is a job. And they most likely have a boyfriend and a family already, because if they're a good-looking, hot Latina, you don't think there's some good-looking macho Latino boyfriend behind the scenes somewhere? Hey, my own brother got sucked into that on a Latin dating site. In fact, he said he never met a single Latina that didn't ask him for money within the first 3 days. Now, I know we're getting towards the end of the show, and we'll continue this later, but here's my recommendations for getting on WhatsApp or any one of those dating sites. If she asks you for some money, because, you know, almost all of the Latinas are broke or have a kid or two, and they really do need money. For the basics even. I mean, look, this is COVID, and they've locked down all over Latin America, too, so everybody's hurt. If you're going to, let's say, send $50 by Western Union, here's a tip. Tell her you've got 3 conditions. 1, you must be able to do a video call with her. That is, face-to-face, online video. And if she gives you some excuse like her internet's bad or whatever, dump her and block her. She's lying. Because remember, all Latinas have high-end cell phones, better than yours. Even broke and lower middle-class ladies do. And they've got very good internet down here, so she's lying to you. Next, you tell her you'll send that money, but you need her to take a photo of her passport or cedula and send it to you first. And if she balks at that, you say, well, in order to send money on Western Union, you got to produce your passport. It's only good manners and reciprocal that you see hers. If she won't, dump her and block her then and there. If she passes that test, next, tell her to hit the location button on her WhatsApp so you can see exactly where she is when she's making that call. And, of course, you'll do the same for her. And if she won't do that, she's lying about something, about maybe where she lives, maybe even about the country she lives in. There are groups of lonely hearts scammers out there, you know. If she won't give you the location, hit that location button on WhatsApp, something's really fishy, so you should dump her and block her then and there. And finally, you ask her for a video of her in her house with her family, her mother, kids, whatever. In other words, you want to see just how she lives, and you want to see unposed pictures, because, you know, all the pictures they send you on dating sites are posed and staged. And if she bucks at that, she's playing you, and probably 10 other guys too. Dump her and block her then and there. All right, we're at the end, so to be continued.
You've been listening to the Expat Files, living in Latin America. If you need some help with your own plan B, we can schedule a one-on-one phone or Skype consult. Just send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com. And if you want to get on the waiting list for my next week-long Expat Insider Seminar in Central America, where you're guaranteed to get a 2 to 5 year head start on your plan B, send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com. Nos vemos.